The ocean that morning looked like a pane of smoked glass, motionless and withholding, as if the entire surface were listening. Aboard the Solace Explorer, a small research vessel 2 miles off Queensland, Australia, the crew spoke in clipped phrases that died quickly in the air. Marine archaeologist Daniel Reeves checked his gauges the way a pianist checks keys before a performance. Calm, methodical, ritualized. He had logged more than 600 dives, but this one carried a stubborn pressure behind the ribs that he could not explain. The wreck below them, suspected to be the British submarine Andromeda, lost in 1945, sat at an estimated 110 meters. The sonar imagery was unnervingly clean, the hull upright, the bow slightly raised as if frozen mid-ascent. There were also distortions, heatless shapes near the main hatch, static ghosts sitting where currents should have erased everything. Reeves sealed his helmet. Oxygen sighed into his ears in tidy metronomic bursts. From the control console, project lead Mara Voss raised her hand without smiling. "All systems green," she said into the mic. "Visibility low. Keep your cam rolling from splash to ascent. Confirm?" Reeves gave the smallest thumbs up. "Confirmed." He shuffled backward, heels to gunwale, then let the world tip and fold over him. The sea accepted him in one clean swallow. At 15 meters, light fractured into ribbons. At 50, color vanished, the water shifting to that deep newspaper blue that makes the horizon feel imaginary. By 80, darkness felt like a pressure on his visor, a subtle push that said, "You do not belong." He tested his buoyancy, corrected by a breath, and followed his guideline down the last 30 meters. Every sound, his breath, the tick in his right ear, the faint crackle of distant radios, became architecture. The Andromeda materialized as a horizontal dusk in the murk, then as rivets and scars, then as a whole body resting on the seafloor like a monument. Upright, intact, waiting. Reeves let his light travel the hull, the beam catching the faded curve of painted letters, ANDRO. Then corrosion devoured the rest. He narrated gently for the record. Approaching primary hull. Depth 110. Exterior looks structurally stable. No visible breach. Minimal current. His voice sounded smaller than usual, as if the water were editing confidence out of the words. That was when the vibration started, so faint he thought it was his pulse echoing in the regulator. A slow, sub-audible thrum traveled through the metal under his glove. 3 long beats, a silence, then 2. He waited, heartbeat miscounting. Nothing. Then again, 3. Pause, 2. He brought the glove away. The sensation stopped. He set it back on the steel. The sequence returned, patient and exact, as if the ship itself had learned to breathe in a new rhythm. "Control, do you copy?" Static answered like frost. The comm light showed healthy, the bars full, yet the line felt crowded by distance. Reeves logged the anomaly, not trusting his voice to describe it. He drifted toward the main hatch. The wheel was furred with algae, but the edges looked almost sharp beneath the growth, like something had toyed with it recently. He steadied his breathing. He told himself a story he had told 100 times before. Wrecks make noises. Metal keeps memories. You are the only living thing down here. The hatch resisted with an offended groan, and then yielded in a sigh of trapped century air. A galaxy of silt rose and rolled, swallowing his lamp in grey snow. Reeves waited for the cloud to thin, counting slowly to 60, the way he had been taught when patience might save oxygen later. "Entering interior corridor," he whispered for the camera. The beam made a tunnel of brightness that ended 2 meters from his mask. Pipes ran the length of the passage like veins. Glass gauges bloomed with algae. A spanner floated near the ceiling, arrested in a physics that felt theatrical. He passed the crew compartment. Bunks stood in 2 neat tiers, blankets fossilized in folds, locker doors ajar as if someone had half-packed for a shore leave that never came. A chipped enamel mug hovered against a rail, every chip grown artillery rust. Above one pillow, he found a small brass plate greened with age, S. Monroe. He filmed the letters carefully and heard his own breath change shape in the helmet. "Likely sealed since 45, he said. "Internal collapse minimal. Surprising preservation." He lingered a beat too long, then pushed on. The temperature inside the wreck fell 2 degrees in under a minute. His suit compensated, but the cold found his wrists, that thin band of skin where gloves and sleeve negotiate. The stillness was the stranger thing. Wreck interiors usually carry life, shrimp, eels, a feeling of being politely ignored by a busy city. Here there was nothing but his lamp and an old smell he could not possibly smell. Oil, iron, damp wool. He knew it was a memory masquerading as chemistry. Something scraped, faint and metallic, somewhere ahead. He pivoted, light slicing the corridor, expecting to catch a collapsing panel in the act. Nothing moved. He turned his gain up a notch. The sound returned, measured, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. The pattern from the hull translated into sound. Reeves swallowed. "Control, any audio on your end?" The static answered like snow on an empty channel. He logged the noise but did not name it. Names have gravity. He entered the control room and felt, absurdly, that he had walked into a theater after the lights had gone down. Switches and levers climbed 2 walls. A cracked map clung to a frame with stubborn dignity. His lamp drifted across an angled panel, and for the smallest fragment of a second, the glass held a reflection that did not belong to him. A pale oval, where no oval should be a suggestion of eyes, then a powder of silt erased it. He spun. Only gauges and shadows answered. "Light artifact," he told the recorder, though the sentence had no bones. The next bulkhead had buckled inward, as if something had argued with it from the other side. Reeves set his palm against the dent without meaning to, the way a person touches a door as they listen for voices. The metal trembled back at him. 3 slow pulses, a pause, then 2. He withdrew his hand as if burned. "Hello?" The word sounded anthropological rather than hopeful. The wreck answered with a hollow silence that made his own breath sound theatrical. He checked remaining gas. 41 minutes. Enough for a measured exit, not enough for mistakes. He should have turned. Instead, he unspooled the small line he used for short penetrations, clipped it, and worked the buckled hatch until the seal gave. Silt boiled again, black as ink spilled in a well. He waited, counted, waited. When the water cleared, the room beyond opened like a stage, wider than the corridor, ceiling low, consoles climbing like altars to vanished procedures. A faded flag stuck to a corner, colors leached to memory. Something hung near the ceiling at the far end, pale as paper. For a heartbeat, he read it as fabric, shirt sleeve, bandage, surrender. Then it rotated with a patience not entirely explained by current and settled into a shape that suggested shoulders and the absence of a face. Reeves raised the beam by instinct, then hated the instinct because light is invitation. The shape receded by an equal patience and dissolved into the darker corner between 2 panels. He had the unscientific conviction of being assessed by something that had more time than he did. "Control," he said, voice gone small. "I have anomalous motion at my 10 o'clock." The channel remained a snowfall of hush. He fiddled the squelch. The hush gained texture, but not words. Something knocked again, closer now, 3, pause 2, like a code, only the metal understood. He backed a hand's width, bumped a console, and kicked up a blizzard of rust that turned the room into a galaxy of red stars. Through that field, for 4/10 of a second that the camera later confirmed, a pale mask hung in space at shoulder height, featureless and grief-colored. Panic is noisy. Reeves knew this as doctrine. He named things out loud to keep panic from crowning. "Exiting command room," he said, which was true except his body wanted to exit all water everywhere. He reeled in the line too fast and tangled it. He cursed. He fixed it with the clumsy politeness of gloves. The knocks followed him down the corridor, as patient as tide. 3232. The wreck felt awake, not hostile, not kind, simply unwilling to forget. Something brushed his right shoulder with the softness of spider silk in a basement you haven't visited since you were small. He refused to look back. You look at what you invite. The exfil footage would later convince even skeptical technicians that fear has geometry. The beam swings in arcs, settles, shivers, advances, bubbles swarm like comets, metal ribs parade past like counting sticks. Reeves found lefts that should have been rights. He misremembered a junction and met a wall at speed, the camera bucking his helmet ring with a sound like a bell. His oxygen alarm nudged him with beeps that landed perfectly in the gaps between the knocking sequence, as if machine and myth had agreed on a drum pattern. Radio crackle returned in torn banners. "Daniel, copy! Your vitals are spiking. Feed is unstable. Say position." He flooded the channel with breath. "Inside, exiting. There is motion inside, not alone." The final words cost air and authority. The voice on deck broke into fragments, then into weather. He found the first hatch by luck or muscle memory. It resisted the way doors resist in nightmares, as if the idea of hinges had been retired. He put a second hand to the wheel and pulled. The seal tore with a pop that he felt in his teeth. He glanced back exactly once, a reflex that belonged to land animals. At the far end of the corridor, where his lamp flattened into haze, a single vertical pale form interrupted the dark like a pillar wrapped in old linen. His rational mind offered three solutions: fabric, collapsed insulation, the reflection of his own beam on rivets. His older mind, the one that remembered basements and thresholds, offered none. He left. At 70 meters, space widened and the sea became a color again. The wreck fell below like a memory already arguing with itself. Reeves slowed only enough to keep his ascent safe. Panic would not buy him air. The knocking had no water to travel through now, yet he imagined it continuing, not louder, only inevitable. He broke surface hard and wild. Hands on the deck caught him with the competence of people who had practiced the catching more than they wished. He stripped his mask and said a sentence he would later regret for its certainty. "There is someone down there." Sonar returned the indifference of instruments. One body, one heat bloom, one moving thing. The others stared at monitors that insisted on reason. Reeves sat against a locker and made his hands stop shaking by will and by counting. They rolled footage. Most was storm, silt, bubbles, trembling light. But minute 12 held a small cathedral. The beam steadied on a console. The rust motes settled. In the frame's rear margin, a human-height smear separated from the darkness like fog, discovering a shape it had always planned to reveal. A pale hand resolved to the wrist, fingers spread in a gesture that could be greeting or refusal. Then a fold of silt crossed the lens and the hand became weather again. 2 weeks bled into paperwork. The Oceanic Research Council confirmed what the divers already believed. The wreck was HMS Andromeda, declassified logs naming a systems failure on April 18, 1945, somewhere between testing grounds and home. No mayday, no debris field recovered at the time. 42 names lined the final page, a roll call that sound engineers and historians now spoke like liturgy. Among them, Lieutenant Samuel Monroe, Communications. Reeves remembered the bunk plate and did not like that memory. The footage spent 6 days inside a lab that swallowed sound like the ocean swallows light. Technicians stabilized frames, subtracted noise, translated jitter into narrative. Most sequences refused to be rescued. The sea had edited them with a heavy hand. But the last 90 seconds developed an attitude when cleaned. Thermal overlays, calibrated against Reeves's suit temperature, registered a second heat source at 5 meters, stationary and vaguely vertical. Parallax analysis suggested it occupied a real location in the room rather than living as a smear on the lens. When the analysts enhanced a console's chrome trim, they found the faintest echo of a reflection, a grey oval lowering toward the surface, like a face testing water. Skeptics built a rigorous house. They named scattering, backscatter, caustics, particulate bloom, light field illusions. They ran simulations in a tank seeded with rust and glass powder. They recreated the knocks with expanding air trapped in seams. Most tests explained most things, and yet something small kept slipping the net. A rhythm that repeated whether Reeves moved or not. A second signature that appeared in equipment that had never been inside the wreck. Hydrophone buoys moored above the site returned weeks of low-frequency data. When mapped, certain pulses organized themselves into a motif. 3, pause, 2. Men who did not like patterns pretended not to hear it. Reeves resigned with a note that would become rumor. He moved inland farther than people who love water usually move. He turned down interviews and declined conferences, and avoided pools like an allergy. In the sealed letter he filed with the board, he wrote the only line that the leak would later carry into bars and message boards. It wasn't a ghost. It was waiting. It knew I would come. Psychologists under contract passed the sentence 3 ways and missed the 4th. Divers who know about doors and the things that stand behind them did not pass. They nodded, and some of them stopped diving the week they read it. Access around Andromeda tightened into jurisdiction. The deck crew called the grid square the corridor of echoes because jokes keep hands steady. Fishermen who visited the coordinates to see if superstition could pull more fish out of water than luck came back with stories that sounded like tapping under their hulls when the sea went still enough to count. The research vessel returned quarterly, the way doctors visit quiet rooms, and set its instruments into the water. Most trips reported numbers, which is to say comfort. A few returned with traces that resembled heartbeats taught by pressure, how to slow without quitting. Those files were footnoted and moved into folders that have a way of being misplaced. No official report uses the word haunting. Governments dislike verbs they cannot budget. The language of the consolidated brief is mostly infrastructure, structural integrity, corrosion index, survivability window, post-impact chronology. And yet the document wanders into the human now and then, as if the rec room required a witness even on paper. It notes that the crew quarters remained orderly beyond expectation, that personal effects showed low dispersion, that an enamel mug still floated as if waiting for a hand. It lists Lieutenant Samuel Munro's role in life, signals, encoding, and then by omission his role in the death nobody watched. It does not mention the nameplate, because the nameplate is a detail and details are where belief hides. Acousticians split into camps. One camp mapped the knocks to thermal cycling in sealed seams and showed graphs that coaxed the sound into obedience. Another compared the intervals against known distress codes used at sea when voice fails, and found coincidence persuasive only until the 4th dataset. A small third group said the rhythm resembled a slowed cardiac pattern, distorted by hull resonance and long travel through cold columns. Someone asked at a bad moment whether a ship can keep a body of sound the way metal keeps heat. No one wrote the answer down. Reeves allowed himself one final view of the edited footage in a quiet room with a single lamp, because the loop had to close somewhere. He watched his own light stutter across panels and maps and a flag that had forgotten its colors. He watched the place where the reflection appears in chrome, the place where a hand organizes out of weather. He paused on the bunk plate when it floated into frame, Monroe. Letters greener than the ocean has a right to make anything. He wanted to apologize and didn't know to whom. He wrote nothing in the provided box marked additional statement. Years pass in administrative increments. The wreck does not move, though it sounds sometimes like movement rehearsing. Divers who break restrictions because boundaries invite them return pale and quiet, and a little bit older in the eyes. Some say they heard nothing. A few say they heard 3 knocks, then 2, as if somebody inside a sealed thing had not learned that doors can be retired. 1 or 2 say they felt their own gloves answer the hull without meaning to, the way a person touches a door they have no permission to open. On certain windless nights, a buoy records a motif, and the deck tech logs it with more care than the paycheck demands. No one says haunting, everyone hears waiting. Inland, on a street that smells of cut grass and warm hose water, a man who used to live underwater waters a stubborn square of lawn. He does not swim. He keeps a radio on low because silence has edges if you let it stand. When he sleeps, his chest rises in a tempo that machines would recognize. 3, pause 2, because bodies learn from rooms they enter. Sometimes he dreams of thresholds and wakes with his palm tingling, as if a door were asking a question through old metal. He sits, drinks tap water, and listens for a sound that does not belong in houses. When the fridge kicks on, he laughs without humor and goes back to bed. The quiet after the fridge is the kind of quiet people move inland to buy. It holds. If you stand on the deck of the Solace Explorer at dawn on a day when the sea forgets to move, you can sometimes hear the ship settle, and a buoy chirp once, and the long hush between events. Far below, where maps flatten into dark, a hull keeps its shape more stubbornly than memory should allow. In that hull is a room. In that room is air old enough to be history. In that air live sounds that do not know they are finished. Men once worked there, carried codes there, slept and wrote letters and taped photographs above pillows. One of them spelled Munro on a thin plate that has outlived his pulse. If there is an answer here, it is not in ghosts or metals, but in the way attention persists. The ocean keeps pressure. The wreck keeps time. People keep listening. 3. Pause 2. Not a message maybe, only a habit. Not a haunting. Only a room remembering how to be a room.